Hello, everyone, and welcome to another ASUG Partner Webcast. My name is Maureen McInerney, Partner Marketing Specialist here at ASUG, and I'll be your moderator for this event. I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to join us for this presentation today. Today's webcast is being recorded. The link to the recording and the accompanying slides will be posted to the ASUG website calendar of events, and all registrants will receive a follow-up email with the link to those materials once the webcast has concluded. I'd like to remind our audience members that you could submit your questions at any time by clicking the purple Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Today's webcast is Ask a Fixer, what you should know about converting to material ledger. Our speaker today is Paul Ovigele from ERPfixers. And with that, I'll hand it over to Paul to get us started today.
Thanks for that introduction, Maureen, and thank you everybody for joining this webcast. As Maureen said, my name is Paul Ovigele. I'll introduce myself more formally in a couple of slides. So first of all, I want to talk about ERPfixers. It's a company that connects you with SAP experts online or occasionally on site. We do have thousands of consulting experts on the platform, and we do several offerings such as online requests for SAP issues or questions. We help with optimization of SAP modules. And when I say optimization, I mean functional optimization. You know, how best can we use this module to help our business processes? Material ledger, which is what this webcast is about. And we have several offerings on that. We help with S/4HANA roadmap. And we have certain reports that are customized that we can help to provide some transparency to businesses. ERPfixers is a partner with ASUG, and you would probably see our banner on the ASUG website. And it's pretty seamless if you're an ASUG member, because if you're an ASUG member, then you're automatically an ERPfixers member. If you click on the banner, we have a synchronized user setting between ERPfixers and ASUG. So it's pretty seamless to actually go on our website and see what it's about. So my name is Paul Ovigele. I've been a FI CEO consultant since '97. I've worked both in the US and internationally. Although my areas are FI and CO, just when you work within the FI and CO module, you get kind of tangled up with all the other modules, a lot of the other modules. So the integration points, I'm actually pretty familiar with them as well. And I've also worked in several industries. In fact, when I started my career, I was doing more like, start to finish implementations. Now I'm doing more optimizations and implementation of certain modules, not the whole thing, not on a full SAP project, but just, material ledger or COPA or new GL or S4, things like that. So something just really more specific. I've written 3 books so far. One is on financial accounting, one is on COPA, and one is on material ledger. So this webcast topic is on converting to material ledger. Now, at ERPfixers, if you've attended any of our webcasts, we've done quite a few on material ledger. Firstly, because it is one of my specialties, and secondly, because it is now required with S4. So we're getting more questions about it, and there's still a little bit of confusion in the air about material ledger and what it means to be required. But those webcasts that we did in the past were more focused on the functionality of material ledger and what you do and what it does and what you need to do to make it work. We haven't really had a webcast that's focused on how do you get from where you are to material ledger. We've mentioned it, we might have had a few slides, but this one is really more focused on it. And we have like 2 major segments of the webcast. One is in ECC and 2 is in S4. Because even with all the talk about S4, not every company is ready to go to S4 yet. right? So you may be, depending on your path, your material ledger path right now, you may just be looking for, what are the pointers to get you from where you are to material ledger and ECC. So we have both of those covered. And then we'll leave about 10 minutes at the end for questions. So in the ECC system, if you are planning or thinking about going to material ledger, one of the first things is how do you prepare the system for this material ledger conversion? Because that's what it is. You're going from where you are to what you need to do to get material ledger up and running. You need to ensure that all plants in the company code are activated to material ledger, meaning that if you have plants in the company code which are active, make sure they are all active for material ledger. If you have inactive plants, it's okay to have them not activated for material ledger as long as you're sure they will not be activated in the future. Between activation and production startup, and I'll explain that a little in more detail later, but just very briefly, activation means the plant is active for material ledger. Production startup means the data that you have in your inventory valuation tables have been replicated in material ledger tables. So these are two different things. So the rule is that between the time you activate the plant, think of activation as a checkbox, and when you do this data migration, make sure that no material master or inventory transactions happen within that window. Because no material master or inventory transaction should happen, you obviously want that window to be as short as possible because some businesses, cannot survive without having, a 24-hour, production activity cycle. So you need to make sure that window is as narrow as possible. The normal recommendation is 24 to 48 hours, normally during downtime or a weekend. And also to facilitate reconciliation, all the currencies in FI should be enabled in material ledger. When I say all the currencies, I don't just mean any currency that you post to. I mean all your FI company code currencies, right? So I think in ECC you have up to 3 if you're not using special ledger. So key part of going to material ledger is reducing your existing data volumes, right? And the ways you can do that is by doing account maintenance, transaction MR11, which clears off postings in your GRIR account, closing any redundant open POs, closing any open production orders, archiving PO history records if you can, because remember the whole point is that conversion program, which I'll talk about later, you want it to run as smoothly and quickly as possible, okay? Because remember, you have just a short time window to do this. So the quicker that program can run, the better. And if you want the program to run quickly, reduce data. And then one misconception, which at least I've heard, is people think, oh, well, maybe that's just for ECC, that in S4, we can just go ahead and, run the migration program and we're okay. No, depending on how much data you have, you could have issues in S4 when you're migrating to S4 if you have so many POs, so many plants, you could still have that issue. And SAP generally recommends before an S4 conversion that you should try to streamline your data anyway. But definitely for material ledger, I think this is something that should be looked at. Whether or not you do it, you should at least look at what you have and what potential issues could occur. One of the big contributors to data volume is your purchase order line items and history. And let me explain what is going on with material ledger and purchase orders, because this is another area where there's sometimes some confusion. What material ledger is trying to do when you do the conversion is convert your purchase order histories into parallel currencies. So one of the objectives of material ledger is that you can now have your inventory in more than one currency. So if that is to take place, then your purchase orders should also be converted into more than one currency. Now, the thing is, not every company needs their inventory in multiple currencies. So if you don't need multiple currencies, if you're okay with one home currency, which is USD, for example, then you don't need to worry about the conversion into parallel currencies, right? However, when you run the conversion program, the program is still going to take a look at all your purchase order histories anyway. So it's not like if you don't use parallel currencies, the program is going to skip this purchase order history step. It's still going to look at, if you have 100 million purchase orders, which the system needs to go through, even if you use just one currency, it's still going to go through that 100 million. So it's not going to convert it, so it's going to be shorter, but it's still going to go through. So there's still a need to streamline this data. Now, if you do want to streamline the data, you can use transaction MR11, which I've already mentioned, and you can archive your purchase order data. Now, also production orders. And when I say production orders, I mean manufacturing orders. So anything like a production order, process order, product cost collector, any order, basically any internal order which is linked to a material. So up to recently, production orders were not converted with material ledger, right? Material ledger only did materials and purchase orders. But with this note, 1801449, production order histories are now converted as well, right? And also in S/4HANA, production order histories are converted automatically as well, okay? So you also need to close down your production orders that are not being used. In fact, what SAP recommends is close them down anyway. You know, even if you have an order as a WIP status, close it, create it after the material ledger. And they make this recommendation particularly for customers that want to use actual costing. And the logic is that if you have a production order before you convert it to material ledger that had goods movements on it, so there was no material ledger, no actual costing, there were goods movements. Then you activated material ledger and actual costing. Now you want to reverse those goods movements with actual costing activated. There could be some errors or data inconsistencies happening. I got to say that from my personal experience with the projects I have worked on, I'm still yet to see that issue with not closing production orders. But I can't say that means you shouldn't close them, right? But I'm still yet to see the issue. I mean, sometimes with these warnings that SAP gives, it might be something that used to be an issue with an older version of SAP, is no longer an issue, but just in case, they still give you that warning. So I would say, just in case, if you can, where it's feasible, close down as many manufacturing orders as you can. Another prerequisite to a smooth conversion is make sure that your general ledger accounts for inventory. So any general ledger account that has the Account Determination Key BSX in transaction OBYC, make sure it has the setting only balance in local currency. And the reason to have that set up is because one of the things Material Ledger does, particularly if you're using parallel currencies, is it tries to reconcile the currencies in FI with the currencies in Material Ledger. And if there is an issue, you need to run this program. I'll mention it later as well, CKMADJUST. And if you run CKMADJUST and this setting is not done, you'll get the error that I show on this slide, okay? So that is a reason to have this setting in your general ledger. Now, for the most part, and in fact, in normal SAP systems, this only balance in local currency is set. So I think you'll see that it is set, but if it's not, it may give you problems. Now, one of the things with this particular setting is that it's not enough just to set it after the fact. There's a program you need to run to update history as well. And that program needs an SAP note. Unfortunately, I don't have the SAP note there. So if anybody has other questions about this, just send me an email afterwards. But there is more that you should do if you don't have this set. Another thing, and this one is also relevant to if you use parallel currencies. Make sure your exchange rates between your first local currency and your parallel currencies, make sure your exchange rates are in the system, because that's what the material ledger conversion program is using to update the inventory and purchase order histories in these parallel currencies. Another thing to check is make sure there are no missing general ledger accounts in OBYC in the account determination settings between FI and MM. So for example, if you have an account in OBYC assigned to a valuation class, however, that valuation class was never really used. So you never needed to create this account in the general ledger because nobody uses it. When the conversion program is running, it is looking at these accounts and making sure these accounts are set up. So if they're not set up, you'll get an error. So just make sure you go to transaction OBYC if you have access to config. Look at all the accounts assigned to transaction key BSX. Make sure those accounts have a general ledger master on them. Before you run the conversion program, you need to make sure MM and FI are in balance. So one of the key things is material ledger is basically trying to replicate, at least as a starting position, trying to replicate the inventory, think of it as the inventory tables in MM. So if MM and FI are reconciled, by default, material ledger and FI will be reconciled, right? Because material ledger is just a sub-ledger for the materials management module. So you need, before you start, make sure that those two modules, FI and MM, are reconciled. You can use MD5L. You can use the program, and people prefer to use this program, RM07MMFI. And if you have new GL, you can use transaction FAGL MM Recon. And with new GL, when you use this transaction, it's not just looking at, hey, the general ledger account in FI is this value, the general ledger account in MM is this value. It's looking at it by profit center. And if you have segments in new GL, it's looking at it by segments to make sure they're reconciled. In fact, if you look at this slide, you would see that there's a lot of differences for each line. But the total, if you look at the subtotal, the general ledger is 0. So ideally, you want every line to be 0, not just the total. Because if you use new GL, then you're looking to have financial statements on a profit center or segment level. And you would want on that level for the GL and MM to tie. So I would recommend, even if you're not converting to material ledger and ECC, even if you're converting to HANA, you're waiting until you get to HANA, I would suggest that you run this transaction and do what you can even now to make sure that that ties on each line. So the big program that does the conversion is this CKM start, right? This program needs to be run. That's how you go from not having material ledger to having material ledger. And what this program does is converts the material master. I'll show that in a couple of slides. It converts the PO history, as we've been saying, into parallel currencies. And remember, even if you don't have parallel currencies, it's still going to do something, but it just wouldn't create these new currency views, but it'll still look at those POs. And then it also, if you use actual costing, it will activate the actual cost component split if that's what you want. Okay, this program could take as short as 15 minutes or even less, depending on how much data. It could take a couple of days, okay, and I've seen both of them. So it's very important that you reduce the data so this program doesn't run for so long. Okay. Another thing, I don't have it on this slide, but this program is set up to run. If you look in the last section, the lower section of this slide, you'll see something saying a radio button that is activated for material data plus purchase order history. Now, although they're grayed out, if you want to run only material data only and then run purchase order history only, if you put in the command field of the transaction, you enter, I think it's POH, it will make these grayed sections white or modifiable, so you can select only material or only PO history, so that you're not running everything at the same time. Okay, so when a customer approaches me and says they want to do a material ledger project or thinking about doing it, I normally send a questionnaire which would ask several things about the business, the system, and also the data volume in the tables. And that gives me an idea about whether this program is going to cause problems or not. It depends on how much data is in your tables and what you're actually doing, how many currencies you have, and all that stuff is going to contribute to whether this program takes a long time or not. So when the program is run, so what is happening? Well, one of the key things that's happening is this. Think of it as a data migration. The left hand of this table is all the current material valuation tables, MView, OView, EView, QView, and then the purchase order history tables, EKBE, EKPZ. These are the tables that are being replicated into material ledger tables. And it's important, that term replicated, not replaced. So these tables still stay. They just think of it as a copy and paste, right? They're being copied and pasted into material ledger tables. And the material ledger data will come on top of that when you start using the system. So on the left, you have the old inventory valuation and purchase order history tables. On the right, you have the material ledger tables for header record and quantity and prices and total records, and also purchase order history records in material ledger. In fact, if you want to narrow down on which of these tables is really causing the problem, on the lower right, the one called MLWare is always a problem if you have a lot of purchase orders, because it's most likely you're going to have a lot more purchase orders than you have materials, right? And when you're converting those purchase order histories into material ledger tables, this MLWare always gives problems. Okay. And another thing to note, just looking at the screen, and this will give you a little hint into what SAP was doing or what the mindset was about making material ledger required in HANA. If you look here, you're replicating inventory valuation tables into material ledger tables. That means when you have material ledger, you're going to have more or less the same data in two tables in SAP, in two types of tables in SAP, right? So just hold on to that thought and just think of also SAP's kind of future plan of reducing redundancies and trying to streamline things, So right now, if you have material ledger in ECC, you have the same data in two tables, while SAP's their roadmap, what they're trying to get to is just have one table, which represents multiple things. So another thing that's converted is the material master. Now, I guess this slide would have maybe been a little more informative if I had the before and after. I only have the after here, but the way it looks after you've converted to material ledger, first thing to note, the only thing that changes in the material master with a material ledger activation is the accounting one view of the material master. Now, the material master is this big beast with thousands of fields and everything. It doesn't touch anything else except the accounting one view. Okay, so that's the first thing to know. So what changes in the accounting one view? So instead of just the accounting one view being like one-dimensional, you have subtabs in the accounting one view. Subtabs show the current period, the previous period, the last the last period of the previous fiscal year, then these other tabs, I don't normally look at these, but future costing run, current costing run, and previous costing run. So a few sub-tabs, right? Then also you have the material ledger active box, saying material ledger is active. And then you have the price determination box filled. Right now it's blank if you don't have material ledger. When you have material ledger, it's either going to be 2, which means your material ledger active, but you don't use actual costing, or 3, which means you're material ledger active and you do use actual costing. And then also your cost in your material ledger, in your material master, has as many currencies as you have activated for material ledger, or that you have in CO or FI. So if you have 3 company code currencies in FI, you're going to have 3 here. Yes, if you in CO, you normally have 2, right? So the currency and valuation profile will be reflected when you're looking at your standard cost. So this translation to parallel currency is what material ledger is doing. It takes the first local currency, let's say it's US dollars, right? Let's say your home currency is US dollars. But maybe you have a parallel currency, let's say group currency of euros, right? And maybe another currency, hard currency or something, or Mexican peso, right? So it takes the first local currency, translates it based on what's on the exchange rate table into the other 2 currencies for your materials, right? In your FI, that's already done, right? But this is what's being done on the material level, right? And it's done at a key date to do the translation. And then when you run the CKM start, that's the conversion program, there's a subsequent program I'll talk about on the next slide, CKMADJUST. And that is used just in case when the material ledger conversion does its magic and converts the first local currency to parallel currencies, part of what it does is try to reconcile those currencies to your FI currencies, right? So it does a reconciliation. And if there's something wrong with that reconciliation, then you need to run the CKMADJUST program. And you can run this program anytime, even after you've done inventory movements. Because remember I said, you can't do any inventory movements between activation and production startup. But if you do inventory movements after, you can still run this CKMADJUST after the fact. So the CKMADJUST is really for if you're using parallel currencies, right? The conversion program reconciles the first local currency into the second and or third local currency. If you're not a new GL, you'll use CKMADJUST. If you are a new GL, you use this FHGL-ML-adjust. And anytime I say new GL, just think S/4HANA as well, because, new GL, it's the new GL transactions, and for the most part, processes that feed into S/4HANA, not the old transactions. Right, so it's a pretty simple transaction to run. I mean, just the only key thing here is that if there is a reconciliation, so think of what you're reconciling. The system is reconciling the FI balances in parallel currencies to the material ledger balances in parallel currencies. Most of the time when you do a reconciliation between FI, like the general ledger and anything else, the general ledger is always right? Accountants always like to say the general ledger is the Bible. And so that's how it normally is, except with material ledger. When material ledger is doing a reconciliation, material ledger is the Bible, because it says it's possible someone manually posted to the GL, but it's less likely that someone manually did there's a manual intervention with an inventory movement that hits the inventory account. So when there's an imbalance between the GL and material ledger, it's the GL that needs to be adjusted. And in order to do that adjustment, the offsetting account to inventory would be this stock correction account. In this screen, I have 8999, but it's something you'll have to create when you're converting to material ledger. If you use actual costing, if you plan to use it, and if you want to release a new price when you activate material ledger, you can do it with this transaction CKME. CKME is It's kind of similar to CK24 or even the release step of CK40N. So it's basically just saying, this is my new inventory. This is my new cost for inventory. It can be used, if you don't want to use it, you can use the normal CK40N if you want. If you do want to use it, just note that CKME, when you release your cost, you know, like with CK40N, it's normally releasing the cost that's marked in the costing to field. In CKME, it's first looking at if there's a marked cost in the costing to field. If there is one, it's going to release that cost. If there isn't one, it looks at the future cost in the accounting one view and releases that instead on the valid date. So that's what CKME does, but you know, it really is. I don't see a lot of customers using CKME during a material ledger project. They either use the normal costing run, CK40N, or they just don't even change their cost. They're like, I don't want to change my cost. Let material ledger do what it has to do at the month end. Changing the price indicator. So another thing, I mentioned earlier that when you convert to material ledger, there's this field called price determination, which is 2 if you're not using actual costing, 3 if you are. When you do the conversion, all your materials are actually set at 2, right? Meaning material ledger is active, but there's no actual costing. You actually need to manually run this transaction, and manually just means it's not part of the conversion program. You have to run this other transaction, CKMM, and see you want to convert from the old price determination of 2 to the new price determination of 3. And remember, this is only if you use actual costing. Another thing, if you use actual costing, you may also want to have an actual cost component split, basically splitting your standard and actual, actually in this case, splitting your actual cost into different components of material overhead and things like that. Normally, it's part of configuration of material ledger to activate actual cost component split. However, if you didn't, for some reason, activate actual cost component split when you were configuring, you can run this program called MLCCS_startup, and you can activate actual cost component split after you have done your material ledger conversion. And there are some reasons to do that. You know, sometimes maybe if you had an old cost and you had a cost in your system before you did a material ledger conversion, you didn't do a new costing run until after the conversion, and you want the cost component split to be based on the new standard cost and not the old one. You may want to not activate actual cost component until after you've done your new standard costing run. Okay, and when you run this program, it splits your cost component based on your standard price, right? So remember, with actual costing, actually I say remember, but I haven't said it during this webcast, but when you have actual costing, you have to run a program every month end to revalue standards to actual. So in this case, your initial cost component will be at standard, and when you run that program at month end, it changes it to actual. Okay, so that was the ECC conversion. Now, as everybody knows, or everybody should know, material ledger is required in S/4HANA, right? I think we've beaten this to death. I think everybody knows that now. Before it wasn't widespread, but now I think SAP has broadcast this enough. So, and that means basically, whether you like it or not, you're a material ledger in S/4HANA, right? So whether you like it or not in the next 6 years or whatever, everybody who uses anything inventory-based will be on S/4HANA. So in order to do that, there's certain preparations and steps to move from not having material ledger to having material ledger. And these steps are actually part of the overall migration from ECC, customizing and data to S4, right? So it's just one of the many steps. just like new GL is one of the steps, right? So you have this migration to S/4HANA, which includes material ledger. One mistake that I've heard people or seen people make is they think that, okay, you know, since material ledger is part of S4, I don't need to worry about material ledger until I go to S4. That's wrong. A lot of the things I said from the ECC conversion still apply with the material ledger conversion in S4HANA, right? It's not like now it's part of S4, you magically have kind of leapfrogged all those considerations and preparation for ECC, and now you're magically in S4, right? You still need to, you still could run into these issues with currencies or with data runtime. Obviously, the data runtime is much better in S4, but you still need to watch out for that if you have so much data. So two main activities that you need to complete before you start the conversion to material ledger are the preparations and migration of customizing for the general ledger, right? And that piece, anyone who's on ECC needs to do that. If you're on Simple Finance, the old version of S4, the material ledger wasn't required then, but you did have the new GL then, so you don't need to do this first piece. The second part, which is preparation and migration of customizing from material ledger, everyone needs to do. So anybody, whether you're on ECC with or without material ledger, or whether you're on Simple Finance with or without material ledger, you need to do this preparation and migration. And the reason is because even if you had material ledger beforehand, material ledger itself has changed in S/4HANA. So it's not like, you know, oh, I already have material ledger, I don't need to go through this. Material ledger has changed. A lot more has been added to it for good reasons. All right? So once you've done those two prerequisites, then you start the migration. Now the migration is really doing a lot of the, it's very similar to what we were talking about with CKM Star, right? It's very similar. It's basically populating data in these material ledger tables. In fact, if you look at these material ledger tables, CKMLHD, and I'll look at the tables in the next two slides in further detail, but if you look at them, these are really the tables that were on the right-hand side of the table I showed several slides ago when you were converting from not having material ledger in ECC to having material ledger, right? So this M10 activity, which is one of the steps in an overall S4 finance migration, migrates the material ledger master data and populates these tables. Okay, so it populates this material ledger tables, then also the data in the inventory valuation tables, right? So this is basically that is similar to the table, the left part of the table that I showed several slides ago, MView, OView, QView. Those inventory valuation tables are now migrated. Now, they're not migrated to material ledger tables, these view tables. They are migrated to the ACT.A table. Now, I'm hoping everybody knows what ACT.A is. You know, it's, unless you've been living under a rock in the SAP world, you know ACT.K is a universal journal. This is that big table in S/4HANA that is that holds so many previously separated tables. So, and if you look, if you have seen that universal journal chart that I think, you know, again, everybody kind of shows that chart that shows all these different modules feeding into the universal journal, you'll see that one of those feeder modules is material ledger. And what they mean is these tables, these inventory valuation tables, which are now part of material ledger, are in ACT.K, are in the universal journal. So that's part of the migration process. So the existing tables to replace with new tables. So I have all this stuff, and some of you who either are not technical or don't care about this stuff may not need to worry about it. But I'm going to show this table and the next slide, a table in the next slide, because it really shows how many old tables are being, think of it as compressed or combined or consolidated into one or two new tables, right? Even on the left-hand side, on the top part of this table, I don't even have all the tables listed. There's so many tables, and all they're going into MLDoc and MLDoc extract. And what this is if you had material ledger before, every material ledger document, depending on what it was populated in all these ML this, ML that on the left part of the screen. And now every material ledger document is just an MLDoc. In the second part of this table, every material ledger document that had a cost component split in actual costing had these tables, MLKPH, CKMLKPH, KEO. That goes to the MLDoc, the CCS of a cost component split, right? So again, many tables to one table. Then the costing run table, that is just a one-to-one match, but that also changes to ML run list. Then the tables MKPF and MSEG. So that's another thing, especially, I think this one started in 1610, in S4HANA 1610. SAP came out with something like the Universal Journal for Material Ledger. That table, MATDoc. MATDOC is what MKPF and MSEG used to be, right? So MATDoc is the replacement. Then, as I mentioned before, all the MView, OView, QView tables are now part of ACT.A, okay? So if I've confused you with all that, I'll summarize it with I'll put it in basically three categories. So one, any material ledger documents, particularly if you use actual costing, any material ledger documents or material ledger data in material ledger tables are now in the MLDoc or MLDoc CCS tables. That's one. Secondly, any postings relating to inventory, meaning anything in MKPF, MSEG, and you post a goods receipt, you post a goods movement, all that stuff is now in MATDoc. Then any inventory valuation, so you hold inventory that's, make to stock, make to order, project stock, all that stuff is now part of ACT.A, the Universal Journal. So if you're not interested in tables and all that, just think of it as material ledger there's three pieces to all the consolidation of tables, the old tables to new tables. Okay, so other migration steps. Now, these other migration steps are pretty similar to what we spoke about with when we were talking about ECC. So the M11 step is the purchase order history table conversion. Remember, we said, material ledger converts materials and it converts purchase order history. So we talked about the material part. The purchase order history part is what ML11 is doing. So basically, it's taking the purchase order history tables, EKDE, EKDH, and it's replicating that in material ledger. It's also taken production order history tables, right? Remember before, production order history was not considered, but either you have to apply a note in ECC or in S4HANA, it does it automatically. So production order and purchase order history are converted to material ledger. Okay. Then M20 is just basically think of that as the reconciliation step, right? Reconciliation step that says, what is in my inventory and material ledger tables, and I'm going to compare that to what's in my GL, in my ACT.A table. Similar to when I said run MB5L in ECC, compare FI to material ledger, that's what M20 is doing. Then M21 is doing a similar thing just for production and purchase order history. It's a reconciliation of the purchase order and the purchase order history currencies. Okay. So a key thing here with one of the things I like to tell potential material ledger, any company that's considering moving to material ledger is you have to ask yourself some questions as a business. You have to say, what do I want out of this thing? Because, you see, what I've been hearing, because I speak to quite a few companies about material ledger, about their plans, about, what the best way what the best path to material ledger is. And most of the time, especially now that it's required, the companies asking me for advice are trying to go for the path of least resistance. How can we get from ECC to material ledger and S/4HANA and not have any technical headaches? And they don't ask the question, how can we have, now that we have to have this tool that can do so many different things, what can we do? What can we do now, even before migrating to S4? What can we do now? That's not, and this is not just about what can we do now to ease the pain of a migration, but how can we leverage that good stuff we're going to get in the future? How can we prepare for that? What can we use it for? And I think that's very important because, like I said, majority of the questions or comments I get is basically on, we just don't want a painful migration, But I think there needs to be a strategic approach to this because I know SAP did it partially for technical reasons, making a material ledger required, but really, this is a good starting point to start getting better granular data, more reports that you couldn't get right now, better transparency, better reconciliation. There's so many advantages you can take use of, you can utilize when you're a material ledger. So ask yourself the kind of question, what currencies do you want to, do you need to, if you value inventory in just one currency, is there a need to do it in multiple currencies, right? Do you do transfer pricing outside the system or with some kind of custom logic? A lot of customers do that. Do you want to bring that into the system? Do you want to use actual costing? Some people get scared of actual costing because, like, first place, it's more work. Second place, maybe you don't want to know what the actual cost is. It's not controllable, right? Standard cost is more controllable. But maybe you want, even if you don't make actual costing your main book of record for reporting, maybe you wanted some kind of parallel management reporting view that tells you, okay, if we did revalue our inventory, this is how it would look, okay? Then do you need to do balance sheet valuation, FIFO, LIFO, net realizable value? Do you need to do some other kind of valuation on your balance sheet data, which material ledger can be used for, right? Do you have multiple GAAP, IFRS, US GAAP, have different approaches if you're a company an organization that has companies in different regions? Do you want to see different views? Do you want cost of sales to be at actual or standard? Do you want the foreign currency impact in inventory? Do you want it to impact inventory value or don't you? There's a lot of questions that should be asked. I mean, this is just some of them, but hopefully, before either going to material ledger or S4, you need to start thinking about this and that's the other thing. When I look or talk to companies, keep telling you 2025, which is when SAP said everybody needs to go to S4. But if you're going to do something so big in 2025, you need to know probably several years beforehand. If a lot of this stuff is going to change, you need to start strategizing sooner than later. Because I think we all know that in 2 years, all the big changes that happen at S4HANA are going to change exponentially probably in 2 years' time. Already, the difference between 1511, the version of Simple Finance or S4HANA in 1511, so in 2015, is significantly different from 2018. So 2020 will probably be more different. So again, the approach of planning and strategizing is very important. The other thing to consider is what's the timing, right? So obviously, and this, I know this slide kind of narrows it down to just material ledger, but if you're doing an S4HANA conversion, then you have no choice. Once you convert, you're on material ledger. But if you're looking specifically on a material ledger conversion, look out for other projects we could potentially impact material ledger, particularly if you have an inventory project or something related to a new plant or something like that. Just look out for that. I would say plan for a 3 to 6 month project. You know, I've not normally done one for less than 3 months. I've done some more than 6 months, depending on how many plants and how they want to phase their conversion. If you're activating actual costing, the SAP advises to do it at the beginning of the month. I don't always do that. Depending on the customer, they might not need to worry about that. And the reason why is for the next point says, when you do activate actual costing, allow the system a couple of months. Don't expect just in the first month, once you activate, everything is running perfectly. You could have errors. You could have inventory which was valued or has postings that are not really compatible with material ledger, which you need to wean out of the system. And if you're not planning to move to S4 in 2 or more years, and if you have a business justification, I would consider that you start looking at material ledger now. Don't wait. Again, you know, this whole, we'll worry about it in 2025. I don't think that's the approach to move into material ledger. S4 has so many things. You know, everybody knows about new GL being activated, account-based COPA. You know about the business partners with customers and vendors. Then you have new fixed asset accounting. Then you have material ledger. You know, 2025 is going to be a busy year for every company, and everybody waits till 2025. So definitely start strategizing before that. So now I'm going to hand it back to Maureen to ask, to read out any questions we have. I'll try to answer as many as I can in the next 10 minutes. And if I can't, when we send the emails to everyone attended, we normally send it with a Q&A, all the questions asked, and we answer every question. So back to you, Maureen.
Thanks, Paul. As you mentioned, it's now the Q&A portion of the webcast. So if you do have a question, please feel free to use that purple button and add that in there. But I'll get right to it since we do have a few. The first question, does this also include PM orders and other orders, not just PP orders?
All right, so the question is on PM orders, the plant maintenance orders, and I think the question is relating to the conversion of orders. I would say the conversion of orders is the manufacturing orders, right? So the orders where you put inventory, you consume inventory to the order, and you settle the order to a material, so settlement type MAT. With PM orders, you're usually settling PM orders to settlement. It's normally to either CTR, which is cost center, or maybe to COPA. So it's really just the inventory-based orders and not the orders for PM, which really is settling to a cost center.
Thank you. The next question, by closed, you mean CLSD, the orders? Right, so CLSD is good. I always like to say with the orders, mark them for deletion, right? And for those who use production and other kinds of orders like that, you know that closed takes you one step to archiving, but the DFLF flag is even more. So ideally, you want to archive. If you can't archive, delete. You know, there's no reason. If you can close, you can delete, right? If you can delete them, and delete means mark it for deletion, that's even better than close. So I would say if you can't archive, the next best thing to do is delete. If you can't, then yes, close will be the other option. Thank you. Next question. Is costing view changed too when data is converted for ML? No. You know, I mentioned this earlier in the presentation. Only the accounting one view is changed right now. And I say right now because I think every time I talk about something, a change in S4, I think the guys in the SAP labs are already making something new. So, but as we stand right now, it's just the accounting one view. Thank you. The next question, what is RM price control is V? Does this need to be converted to S? Okay, so the price control, the raw material price control, this is a business decision. So V means moving average, right? You don't need to convert it from moving average to standard if you don't want to. Now, I know some customers that say that when they go to material ledger, they convert everything to S, to standard, because they're saying, you know what, since material ledger is going to do the revaluation, we don't need moving average
anymore. But some companies still want to do moving average, and there's nothing stopping you from having moving average and having material ledger. The only thing to know, if you have moving average, it means you're already kind of doing an actual cost in real time. So you're not going to be able to run that material ledger actual cost program at the end of the month. So moving average is good. It's still fine. You can do V or S. Just note that with V, you can't do actual costing. Also note that if you're on S/4HANA, because what happens, even when you're on S, right, standard, you can still have something called statistical moving average, right? Which means even though you're on S, you can still see the moving average cost get updated every day or anytime you get an invoice or goods receipt. However, the recommendation by SAP is when you're on S4 is to switch off the statistical moving average if you want to use standard. So if you don't want to use standard, stick to V. If you want to use standard and you're in S4, turn off the statistical moving average.
Thank you. Next question. We have multiple controlling areas, one controlling area per company code, as for old SAP design. Do we need to first convert to single controlling area before activating material ledger? And they're on ECC EHP8.
You know, so the simple answer is no, you don't need to go to it's not a requirement to go to a single controlling area. However, having multiple controlling areas, and I'm pretty sure the person who asked this knows this, is now almost like a no-no. That whole one controlling area to one company code 90s style design, SAP is definitely trying to lure customers away from it. And that's why they came out with, things like central finance, where you can consolidate your controlling areas into one controlling area. So, if you have one controlling area per company code, what I would suggest, if time, resources, budget, that whole thing is available, is try to consolidate those controlling areas. Because what is happening, if you think about what is happening with S4, it's kind of giving you the chance to redesign any kinks you had in your system, which is why SAP brought out central finance to consolidate controlling areas, or they sometimes are recommending do a greenfield in S4, right? Don't stick to your old approach if it's really going to be convoluted, because the new approach is really going to assume that SAP's best practice have been met. And just one more thing on that, because I know I made my answer more S4HANA centric. I don't know if the person who asked is moving to S4HANA. But one thing I want to say is that if you're not planning to move to S4HANA and you have this, multiple controlling area design, I would say, yeah, you can activate material ledger for the company codes or the plant linked to that controlling area. But if you're doing any transfers of inventory from one company code or one plant to another that's in a different controlling area, the actual costing will not flow through to the receiving company code or plant.
Thank you. The next question, how can FIFO be used with the material ledger and actual costing?
Oh, so FIFO, so material ledger and actual costing, you think about FIFO, even if you don't have material ledger, there are certain settings you can have in the system that can revalue your balance sheet in a different way from just saying from blending your costs across periods. So FIFO obviously is a different methodology. It's a methodology that says, I want my inventory to be valued on a first in, first out basis. The way it integrates, and you can use it with or without material ledger. With material ledger, the only difference is that cost that's being used to do the revaluation is based on the first in, first out methodology. So two things to note there is that you can use it without material ledger, but if you have material ledger, the advantage is you're using it based on actual cost.
Thank you. That looks like all the time we have for Q&A, but again, we will be following up with you after the webcast. So Paul, I'll hand it back to you for any closing remarks. before I close the
thanks,
webcast
Maureen.
today.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for attending the webcast. I hope it was useful. If you want more, we're trying to really hammer the message home about material ledger and strategizing, either in ECC or S4. So please visit our website. And then just if you have any questions, just email us on info@ERPfixers.com. I wrote an introductory book on material ledger. It's really just a little e-bite, maybe about less than 100 pages, with Rogerio Faleras on SAP Press. And if you're interested, you can visit this SAP Press and get just a high-level intro to what the functionality of material ledger is in SAP S/4HANA. But apart from that, I'm very thankful for the attendance, and just look out for future webcasts. We have one next month on account-based COPA and converting, just like we talked about converting to material ledger. We have one on converting from costing-based to account-based, which is also another requirement in S/4HANA. So if you are able to attend that'll be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Paul, for a great webcast. On behalf of ASUG, I'd like to thank ERPfixers as well as everyone who took the time today to attend this webcast. If we didn't get a chance to answer your question, the ERPfixers team will follow up with you once it has concluded. Before we go, I'd like to leave you with some quick information on ASUG for anyone unfamiliar with our user group. ASUG helps connect SAP customers to the people and information that they need to maximize their investment in SAP. If you'd like to speak to someone about becoming a member of ASUG, please message info@asug.com. As mentioned before, the recording and slides from today's program will be posted to the website, and all registrants will receive a follow-up email. Please take a moment to complete the survey by clicking on the green button at the bottom of your screen. And with that, I'd like to close today's webcast. Have a great day, everyone.